There are moments in life when the noise suddenly disappears. No applause, no encouragement, no one telling you you're doing the right thing. Just silence. If you've ever stood in that silence, you know how heavy it feels. You start questioning yourself. You replay every decision. You wonder if you were foolish to believe in something no one else could see. And the hardest part isn't the work or the uncertainty or even the fear of failure. The hardest part is standing alone. I know that place well. There was a time when my life looked successful from the outside. A stable job, a good position in a technology company, predictable income, clear expectations. To many people, it looked like I'd already won. Walking away from that didn't look brave to them. It looked irresponsible. When I chose to build something of my own, the reactions were quiet, but sharp. Early failures came fast. Progress was slow. The results didn't justify the risk, at least not in the beginning. Family members didn't understand why I would leave security behind. Friends began to distance themselves. Some joked, some doubted, some simply disappeared. And in those moments, confidence didn't feel like a personality trait or a mindset quote. It felt like a daily decision to not give up on myself. This audiobook is not about pretending that doubt doesn't hurt. It does. It cuts deepest when it comes from people you love or people whose opinions once mattered to you. This is not about becoming emotionally numb or proving everyone wrong out of pride. This is about something quieter, stronger. It's about learning how to build confidence when no one believes in you, when there is no validation, when results haven't arrived yet, when your vision exists only in your mind, and the work you do each day feels invisible. Because real confidence is not built when the world agrees with you. It's built in the gap between effort and outcome. In the days when you still show up, even when nothing seems to be working. In the nights when you question yourself, but choose discipline over comfort anyway. I didn't find confidence by being fearless. I found it by staying, by learning, by failing forward, by continuing when it would have been easier to return to safety, and by holding on to the support of one person who never doubted me, my wife, when it felt like everyone else had already made up their mind. Over time, competence grew. Decisions became clearer. The work compounded. What started in uncertainty slowly became something stable, then something strong. Today, that journey supports over 100 people. But confidence didn't arrive at the finish line. It was built long before anyone could see the result. In the next 60 minutes, you won't hear hype. You won't be told to just believe harder. You'll hear what it actually takes to stand alone without breaking, to keep going without applause, to build a form of confidence that doesn't disappear when opinions change. If you're in that quiet phase right now, this is for you. And if this message resonates with you, share this video with one friend who needs it today. Someone who's standing alone, doubting themselves, and trying to rebuild their life from the inside out. Chapter 1. The day you walk away from safety. There is a quiet moment that comes before every real turning point in life. It doesn't arrive with chaos or drama. It doesn't come with a clear sign telling you what to do next. It arrives as a subtle discomfort, a feeling that something familiar no longer fits, even though it still works. From the outside, everything looks stable. You have a solid job, a respected position, a predictable routine. The kind of life people describe as safe. You're not failing, you're not desperate, and that's exactly why the decision becomes so heavy. Walking away from a bad situation is easy to justify. Walking away from something that looks successful forces you to face a harder truth. You're choosing uncertainty not because you have to, but because you can no longer ignore who you're becoming. I remember standing in that place clearly. On paper, my life made sense. I worked in a technology company, held a high position, and had the kind of career path many people aim for. The future was visible and orderly. Promotions, stability, predictability. But inside, there was a growing awareness that safety had slowly turned into limitation. Not because the job was bad, but because it was no longer aligned with who I was becoming. Safety is comfortable, but comfort has a cost. The longer you stay in a place that no longer challenges you, the quieter your ambition becomes. You stop questioning, you stop stretching, you start managing expectations instead of pursuing potential, and over time, that inner voice, the one that once pushed you forward, starts to fade. The day you walk away from safety is not heroic. It's lonely. There's no applause for choosing the harder road. No reassurance that you're doing the right thing. In fact, most reactions are the opposite. Concern disguised as advice. Doubt framed as realism. Questions like, why would you leave that? Or, isn't this risky? Or, what if it doesn't work? They aren't wrong. It is risky. But what people rarely ask is what it costs to stay. When I decided to step away from that stable role and build something of my own, confidence was not what I felt. I felt exposed. The structure that once supported me disappeared overnight. There was no guaranteed income, no clear roadmap, no external validation telling me I was still doing well. Suddenly, every decision mattered, and every mistake felt personal. This is where confidence gets tested for the first time. Most people think confidence comes from feeling ready. It doesn't. It comes from choosing responsibility before certainty exists. From accepting that there will be moments when you don't know the answer, but you commit to figuring it out anyway. Walking away from safety forces you to confront yourself without titles, without status, without borrowed confidence. And that confrontation is uncomfortable. The mind resists it. It looks for reasons to return. It reminds you of how easy things used to be. It whispers that maybe you overestimated yourself. Maybe you should go back before it gets worse. These thoughts aren't weak. They're the natural response to losing the illusion of control, because safety gives the illusion of control. As long as the structure exists, you feel protected. But protection can quietly turn into dependency. And dependency is the opposite of confidence. True confidence begins the moment you stop relying on external systems to define your worth. Early on, I made mistakes. Many of them. Some were costly. Some were humbling. And some made me question whether I had made the right decision at all. Results didn't come quickly. Progress was slow, and the silence around me grew louder. Family members worried. Friends questioned my choice. Some pulled away. Others watched from a distance, waiting to see how it would end. That period strips you down. You realize how much of your previous confidence was tied to approval, to structure, to predictability. And when those disappear, you're left with one question you can't avoid anymore. Do you trust yourself enough to continue without reassurance? This is where many people turn back. Not because they lack ability, but because they lack tolerance for uncertainty. Going back to safety feels like relief. Staying feels like standing in the open without armor. But staying is where something deeper starts to form. You begin to build self-respect. Not the kind that comes from praise, but the kind that comes from honoring your own decisions. Every day you show up despite doubt, despite fear, despite slow progress. You send yourself a quiet message. I can be trusted. And that message compounds. Walking away from safety teaches you that confidence is not an emotion. It's a byproduct of alignment. When your actions match what you know is right for you, confidence grows, even if results lag behind. Especially when results lag behind. Over time, something shifts. You stop needing to explain yourself. You stop chasing validation. You focus on learning, on improving, on doing the work that matters. Confidence becomes less visible, but more stable. It's no longer something you perform, it's something you carry. Looking back, the day I walked away from safety was not the day success began. It was the day ownership began. ownership of my time, my decisions, my failures, my growth, and that ownership became the foundation for everything that followed. If you're standing at that edge right now, or if you've already stepped into uncertainty, understand this. Discomfort is not a sign you're wrong. It's a sign you've stopped hiding behind certainty. The ground feels unstable because you're no longer leaning on illusions. And that's not a weakness. That's the beginning of real confidence. Chapter 2. Failure is where confidence gets tested. The first failure doesn't feel like a lesson. It feels like exposure. When you leave safety, you expect things to be hard. You prepare yourself mentally for obstacles, uncertainty, and long hours. What you're rarely prepared for is how personal failure feels when there's no system left to hide behind. Every mistake feels louder, every setback feels heavier, and every slow result feels like proof that the people who doubted you might have been right. This is where confidence gets tested. Not in theory, but in reality. Early on, things didn't work the way I imagined they would. The effort was there, the intention was there, the hours were there, but progress lagged behind. Decisions I believed in didn't produce the outcome I expected. Plans had to be scrapped, strategies rewritten, and with every misstep, a familiar question surfaced again and again. What if I made the wrong choice? Failure has a way of stripping confidence down to its core. When you fail inside a safe structure, the system absorbs some of the impact. There are explanations, buffers, titles that soften the blow. But when you fail on your own, there's nowhere to redirect the weight. It lands directly on you, your judgment, your ability, your identity. That's why this stage breaks so many people. Not because failure is unbearable, but because it forces an uncomfortable realization. Confidence built on outcomes is fragile. As long as things are going well, it feels solid. But the moment results disappear, so does the belief in yourself. This is where you have to make a critical shift. Confidence cannot be dependent on immediate success. If it is, you'll abandon yourself the moment things slow down. Real confidence is built by staying committed when results are unclear, by continuing to act responsibly even when there's no reward yet, by separating your worth from your current performance. At first, I didn't understand this. Each failure felt like a verdict, like evidence that I wasn't ready, that I had overestimated my ability to build something from scratch. And when you're already standing alone, that internal doubt can feel unbearable. This is when the temptation to retreat becomes strongest. Safety starts calling you back, not loudly, but convincingly. It reminds you of predictable paychecks, of calm evenings, of fewer sleepless nights. It offers relief disguised as wisdom, and it sounds reasonable, especially when you're tired. But here's what I learned during that phase. Failure is not the opposite of confidence. Avoiding failure is. Every failure I faced forced me to learn something I couldn't have learned inside safety. I had to think more clearly, plan more carefully, improve skills I once ignored, take responsibility for decisions instead of defending them. Failure demanded growth, not excuses. And slowly, something unexpected happened. My confidence didn't grow because I succeeded. It grew because I survived failure without quitting. There is a quiet strength that forms when you realize you can endure disappointment, doubt, and uncertainty, and still show up the next day. That strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like motivation. It feels like stability under pressure. This stage also reveals another truth. Most people don't fear failure. They fear what failure says about them. They fear being judged, being pitied, being proven wrong. But when you're already outside approval, failure loses some of its power. You stop performing for perceptions and start focusing on progress. That shift is everything. I stopped asking, how do I look right now? and started asking, what do I need to learn next? That single change took pressure off my identity and placed it where it belonged, on development. Confidence began to change shape. It was no longer something I felt when things went well. It became something I carried into difficult decisions. I trusted myself not because I had answers, but because I knew I would adapt. I would adjust. I would learn faster the next time. Failure also taught me humility. Not the kind that shrinks you, but the kind that sharpens you. You stop assuming, you stop rushing, you start listening to reality instead of ego. And that humility builds competence, the most reliable source of confidence there is. If you're in the middle of failure right now, understand this. You're not behind. You are being trained. The discomfort you feel is not punishment, it's refinement. Confidence is not meant to protect you from failure. It's meant to be forged by it. The people who appear confident without having faced failure are often the most fragile. Their belief collapses at the first real challenge. But the ones who stay, who absorb the lessons, who adjust without resentment, develop a confidence that doesn't disappear when things go wrong. Failure stops feeling like a verdict and starts feeling like feedback. And once that happens, you stop fearing it. This is the turning point where many people either retreat to safety or grow into themselves. One path offers comfort, the other offers strength. Neither is easy, but only one builds unshakable confidence. Failure will test you. It will question your identity. It will tempt you to quit. But if you stay, if you continue learning instead of retreating, you'll discover something powerful. Confidence doesn't come from getting everything right. It comes from knowing you won't abandon yourself when things go wrong. Chapter 3. When the people you love don't believe in you. There is a kind of doubt that hurts more than failure. It doesn't come from strangers. It doesn't come from critics. It comes from the people closest to you, the ones whose opinions shaped you, the ones whose approval once felt like safety. When they stop believing in you, or never believe in you to begin with, it creates a quiet fracture inside. This is one of the hardest moments on the path of standing alone. When I left stability behind, I expected resistance from the outside world. I was prepared for risk, uncertainty, and even failure. What I wasn't fully prepared for was the emotional weight of watching family members look at my choices with concern instead of confidence. Not anger, not hostility, just a doubt. And that kind of doubt is difficult to argue with because it's wrapped in love. They asked questions that sounded reasonable. They worried about security, about sustainability, about what would happen if things didn't work out. From their perspective, they weren't trying to stop me. They were trying to protect me. But protection can feel suffocating when you're trying to grow. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The people who love you most are often the least equipped to understand your vision, not because they don't care, but because they measure risk through their own fears. They imagine loss before possibility. They see uncertainty as danger, not as opportunity. And when you step outside what they consider safe, it triggers their anxiety. That anxiety doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're unfamiliar. At first, their doubt shook me. I found myself explaining too much, justifying decisions, trying to convince them that I had thought this through, that I wasn't reckless, that I had a plan. And every time I explained, I felt my confidence weaken. That's when I learned something important. Confidence doesn't survive negotiation. The more you seek understanding from people who can't see what you see, the more you dilute your own clarity. Their questions start living in your head. Their fear becomes part of your internal dialogue. And suddenly, you're not just fighting external challenges. You're carrying borrowed doubt. This is where many people give up on their path. Not because they fail, but because they want peace at home. They want approval. They want to feel supported again, so they shrink their ambition just enough to be accepted. But acceptance bought at the cost of self-respect never lasts. There came a moment when I stopped trying to convince anyone, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. I realized that understanding wasn't required for support, and support wasn't required for commitment. My responsibility wasn't to calm other people's fears. It was to stay honest with myself. That shift changed everything. I stopped arguing. I stopped defending. I listened respectfully. But I no longer allowed doubt to dictate my decisions. Silence became my boundary. Not cold silence, disciplined silence, the kind that protects focus. Confidence began to rebuild in a new way. Instead of asking, "Do they believe in me?" I started asking, "Am I acting with integrity today?" Instead of seeking reassurance, I focused on competence, learning more, planning better, working deeper. Quiet progress replaced loud explanation. This doesn't mean the pain disappeared. There were still moments of loneliness. Moments when I wished someone would say, "I trust you." Moments when I questioned whether I was being selfish or stubborn. But each time I stayed the course, something inside me strengthened. I learned that belief from others is a bonus, not a requirement. When family doesn't believe in you, it forces you to become your own source of validation. That's uncomfortable at first. You're not used to it. But over time, it becomes empowering. You stop needing permissions to move forward. You stop measuring progress by approval. You measure it by alignment. Another difficult truth emerges at this stage. People don't need to understand your journey to benefit from its outcome. Many who doubt you today will later enjoy the stability, growth, and strength your persistence creates. But they don't need to be convinced now. Time does that better than words ever could. Confidence grows quietly when you accept this. You begin to realize that love doesn't always look like belief. Sometimes it looks like worry. Sometimes it looks like resistance. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to continue anyway. Standing alone doesn't mean rejecting the people you love. It means refusing to abandon yourself to keep them comfortable. This chapter of the journey is not about rebellion. It's about maturity. It's about understanding that your path doesn't require consensus, that your vision doesn't need to be voted on, that your responsibility is not to meet expectations, but to meet your potential. Over time, something interesting happens. The same people who once doubted you begin to see your consistency, your discipline, your calm under pressure. You stop needing their belief because you've already built your own. And paradoxically, that's when belief often returns. But by then, it no longer defines you. If you're in this stage right now, feeling misunderstood, unsupported, or quietly judged, remember this: confidence is not proven by being believed in. It's proven by continuing without it. The strength you're building now is invisible, but it's real, and it will carry you farther than approval ever could. Chapter 4. When friends turn into spectators. There is a subtle shift that happens when you choose a different path. It doesn't announce itself. No one tells you directly that things have changed. Conversations just become shorter. Invitations come less often. Messages go unanswered. Jokes start to carry an edge. And one day, you realize that the people who once stood beside you are now watching from a distance. This is one of the quiet costs of standing alone. When I first stepped into uncertainty, I assumed friendships would remain the same. After all, I was still the same person. I still valued connection. I still showed up, but something invisible had changed. My direction no longer matched the group's rhythm, and when direction changes, relationships are tested. Some friends became silent. Others became casual critics. A few disguised their doubt as humor. Light comments that landed heavier than they appeared. Not cruel, but dismissive. Not confrontational, but distancing. It wasn't hostility, it was discomfort. People are comfortable when your choices reinforce their own. When you follow a familiar path, you confirm that the rules they live by are correct. But when you step away, when you choose uncertainty over safety, you unintentionally challenge the logic that keeps others comfortable. And most people don't respond well to that challenge. So they observe. They watch to see if you fail. Not always out of malice, but out of self-protection. If you fail, their own hesitation feels justified. If you succeed, it forces them to confront questions they'd rather avoid. This is where friendships often change form. They don't necessarily end. They thin out. Depth turns into surface-level interaction. Support turns into curiosity. You stop being a participant and become a reference point. Someone they talk about instead of talk to. That transition hurts more than most people admit. You begin to wonder if you're imagining it, if you're being sensitive, if the distance is your fault. And because you're already carrying the weight of building something alone, this additional emotional friction can feel exhausting. This is when many people start shrinking themselves. They stop talking about their goals. They downplay their ambition. They adjust their language to fit back into familiar spaces. Not because they've changed their mind, but because they don't want to feel isolated. But isolation doesn't come from being different. It comes from pretending you're not. I reached a point where I realized that trying to maintain the same dynamics was costing me energy I couldn't afford to lose. Every explanation felt like a defense. Every joke felt like a test. Every conversation felt like something I had to manage instead of enjoy. So I stopped trying to be understood. Not out of resentment, out of clarity. This chapter of the journey teaches you something essential. Not everyone who starts with you is meant to continue with you. That doesn't make them bad people. It doesn't make you ungrateful. It simply means growth creates distance where comfort once existed. Confidence deepens when you accept this without bitterness. Instead of resenting the change, I began to observe it honestly. I noticed who reached out without judgment, who asked questions without trying to steer my decisions, who listened without projecting their own fears. And just as clearly, I noticed who drained my focus. This awareness wasn't about cutting people off. It was about protecting my direction. You don't need to confront every shift. You don't need to explain every choice. Sometimes, the most mature response is to let dynamics change without forcing them back into place. And here's something few people talk about. When friends turn into spectators, you gain something valuable. Silence. Silence gives you space to think clearly, to reflect, to build without interference, without comparison, without the pressure to perform or entertain. In that silence, confidence begins to root itself internally instead of socially. You stop asking, "How do I look to them?" and start asking, "Am I moving forward?" That shift is subtle, but powerful. You begin to measure your days by effort, not approval. Progress, not perception. Discipline, not validation. And as this internal framework strengthens, something unexpected happens. You become calmer. Calm is often mistaken for indifference, but it's not. It's focus without distraction. It's knowing where you're going and refusing to be pulled sideways by opinions that don't carry responsibility for your outcome. Some friendships will return later, reshaped by time and respect. Others won't, and that's okay. The purpose of this phase is not to preserve the past. It's to build the future. Standing alone doesn't mean standing empty. It means standing aligned. There were moments when loneliness crept in. Moments when I missed the ease of shared certainty. But each time I resisted the urge to retreat into familiarity, my confidence strengthened. Not loudly, quietly, like muscle built through repetition, not motivation. This stage teaches you that confidence is not social proof. It's self-trust developed under pressure, and pressure reveals truth. It shows you who can walk with you without slowing you down and who needs you to stay where you were to feel comfortable. If you're experiencing this shift right now, don't rush to label it as loss. See it as transition. You're not losing people. You're losing alignment that no longer fits. And what replaces it is something far more valuable. Clarity. Clarity about your priorities. Clarity about your direction. Clarity about the kind of life you're building. Friends turning into spectators is not a failure of connection. It's a sign that your path requires a different level of commitment, one that fewer people are willing or able to make. And that's not a reason to stop. It's a reason to continue. Chapter 5. Building confidence in silence. There is a phase in every meaningful journey that feels invisible. No announcements, no recognition, no feedback telling you that you're on the right track. Just repetition. This is the phase most people misunderstand. They think confidence is built through bold action, loud decisions, or visible wins. But real confidence, the kind that doesn't collapse under pressure, is built quietly, when no one is watching and no one is commenting on your progress. After the initial failures, the doubts from family, and the growing distance from friends, I entered a stretch of time that felt unusually quiet. The noise had faded. There were fewer opinions, fewer conversations, fewer reactions. At first, that silence felt uncomfortable. It felt like being forgotten, but that silence became the most important environment for growth. When no one is paying attention, you stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop shaping your actions around how they might be perceived. And that creates space to work honestly, to learn deeply, and to face your weaknesses without ego. This is where confidence starts to change its source. Instead of being fed by encouragement or validation, it starts to grow from consistency. From the simple act of showing up every day and doing the work that needs to be done, regardless of how it feels. There were days when motivation was completely absent. Days when progress felt painfully slow. Days when the results didn't reflect the effort. But discipline doesn't ask how you feel. It asks what needs to be done. So I built a rhythm. Not an ambitious, overwhelming system, a simple one. Learn, apply, review, adjust, repeat, every day. No shortcuts, no dramatic reinvention. Just steady improvement in areas that actually mattered. Confidence doesn't respond to intensity. It responds to reliability. The more consistent the effort became, the less emotional the work felt. Decisions became clearer. Reactions became calmer. I stopped needing big emotional highs to feel capable. I trusted the process because I was living inside it. Silence also has a way of exposing excuses. When no one is watching, you can no longer blame distraction on others. You can't hide behind explanations. You see clearly where you're avoiding discomfort and where you're doing the work. That honesty is uncomfortable, but it's powerful. Every time I chose to stay focused instead of seeking distraction, confidence grew a little stronger. Not as a feeling, but as evidence. Evidence that I could rely on myself. This is an important distinction. Confidence built in silence is not emotional, it's practical. It's the knowledge that you will do what you said you would do, even when there's no immediate reward. That kind of confidence doesn't fluctuate with mood. It stabilizes your behavior. Another shift happens here. You stop rushing outcomes. When you're no longer trying to prove anything, you can afford to think long-term. You stop chasing quick wins and start building foundations. Skills over appearance, systems over motivation, depth over speed. That patience is often mistaken for passivity, but it's the opposite. It's controlled effort, focused energy, intentional progress. There were no viral moments, no sudden breakthroughs, just gradual improvement that only became visible much later. And that's how real growth works. It compounds quietly before it shows itself. Silence also teaches restraint. You learn not to share every idea, not to announce every plan, not to seek feedback prematurely. You allow your thinking to mature before exposing it to noise. This protects clarity and prevents outside doubt from interfering with early-stage development. The more I worked in silence, the less I needed reassurance. I stopped checking whether I was on track and started trusting my process. That trust didn't come from optimism. It came from evidence built through repetition. This phase is where many people feel lost. They mistake silence for stagnation. They confuse lack of attention with lack of progress. And because there's no external feedback, they assume something is wrong. So they abandon the process too early. But silence is not absence. It's incubation. Confidence forms here because you're learning to depend on yourself. You're building an internal standard instead of chasing external confirmation. And once that standard is set, it becomes incredibly hard to shake. I noticed my reactions changing. Criticism didn't hit as hard. Praise didn't lift me as much. Decisions felt steadier. I wasn't rushing to prove or defend anything. I was focused on building something that worked. That emotional neutrality is a sign of growing confidence. You're no longer driven by fear or excitement. You're driven by clarity. And clarity is calm. This is also where competence starts to show. Not publicly, but internally. You know more than you did before. You see patterns faster. You make fewer emotional decisions. You recover from mistakes quicker. Confidence doesn't announce these changes, it integrates them. By the time others notice growth, you've already lived with it for a long time. If you're in a silent phase right now, where effort feels unseen and progress feels slow, understand this. This is not a setback. This is construction. You are building something that doesn't rely on attention to survive. The world rewards noise, but it respects results. And results are born in silence. The confidence you're developing here won't disappear when conditions change. It won't collapse when opinions shift. It won't depend on being noticed. It will stay with you because it was built when no one was watching. This is where unshakable confidence is formed. Not in moments of recognition, but in long stretches of quiet, disciplined effort. Stay here long enough, and silence will stop feeling empty. It will feel solid. Chapter 6. The power of one person who believes. When you spend enough time standing alone, you start to believe that strength must come only from isolation. You tell yourself that needing support is weakness, that relying on someone else means you're not truly independent. But that belief is incomplete. Real confidence is not built by rejecting connection. It's built by choosing the right kind of connection. There is a difference between seeking validation and accepting support. Validation asks others to prove your worth. Support reminds you of it when you're exhausted. And during the hardest phases of building something from nothing, that distinction matters more than most people realize. At a time when results were uncertain and progress was slow, there was one constant presence in my life. My wife. She didn't try to control the direction. She didn't demand reassurance. She didn't need daily explanations about where things were going. She simply stayed. That presence carried weight. Not because it removed difficulty, but because it made endurance possible. When the world doubts you, even quiet belief becomes powerful. And when that belief comes from someone who sees you clearly, without the filters of ambition or fear, it stabilizes you in ways external praise never can. This chapter is not about romanticizing support. It's about recognizing how rare and valuable it is. Support doesn't always sound like encouragement. Sometimes it sounds like silence when you're frustrated, patience when you're uncertain, trust when there's no proof yet. It's someone who understands that growth is uneven and doesn't panic when progress slows. There were moments when I questioned everything. Moments when exhaustion blurred judgment. Moments when failure felt personal. And in those moments, what mattered wasn't advice or optimism. It was the absence of doubt. the refusal to leave, the steady reminder that I wasn't alone in the work, even if I was responsible for the outcome. That kind of support does not inflate ego. It grounds you. It keeps you from spiraling into self-criticism. It prevents isolation from turning into resentment. And most importantly, it allows you to rest without quitting. Confidence doesn't grow only through effort. It grows through recovery as well. Knowing that someone believes in you gives your nervous system permission to settle. You stop operating in constant survival mode. You make clearer decisions. You think longer term. You stop reacting and start responding. This is where many people get confused. They assume confidence means emotional independence at all times. But human beings aren't designed to thrive in constant isolation. We are designed to choose our alliances carefully. The key is selectivity. One person who believes in you is worth more than a crowd that applauds you conditionally. A crowd disappears when outcomes change. Real support remains when things get quiet. I learned that confidence is strengthened when you allow yourself to be supported without outsourcing your responsibility. My decisions were still mine. My failures were still mine. But I wasn't carrying the weight alone. That balance is essential. Too much dependence weakens confidence. Total isolation hardens it into something brittle. The middle ground, shared belief without shared control, is where resilience forms. This kind of partnership also teaches accountability. When someone stands beside you without controlling you, you feel a deeper obligation to show up fully. Not out of pressure, but out of respect. You don't want to waste the belief you've been given. That accountability sharpened my focus. I worked with more intention. I managed stress more carefully. I stopped taking reckless risks and started making thoughtful ones. Confidence matured. It became less about proving something and more about protecting what was being built. There's another important lesson here. Not everyone who doubts you needs to be removed from your life, but not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Support requires trust, and trust must be earned. One of the reasons my wife's belief mattered so much was because it was quiet and consistent. It wasn't loud, it wasn't conditional, it wasn't performative. It didn't demand updates or results. It existed regardless of outcome. That consistency allowed confidence to deepen instead of fluctuate. If you're fortunate enough to have even one person like this in your life, protect that connection. Don't test it. Don't exploit it. Don't confuse it with entitlement. Support is not guaranteed. It's chosen. And if you don't have that person yet, this chapter still matters, because it teaches you what to look for and what not to rely on. Support is not someone who pushes you to hurry. It's someone who understands pacing. It's not someone who amplifies your fears. It's someone who absorbs them without adding to the noise. It's not someone who tells you what to do. It's someone who trusts you to decide. As confidence grows, something interesting happens. You stop clinging to support out of fear. You start appreciating it from a place of strength. You don't need someone to hold you up. You allow them to walk beside you. That shift is subtle but important. It means your confidence is no longer reactive. It's grounded. It doesn't disappear when circumstances change because it's rooted in both self-trust and chosen connection. Looking back, the presence of one person who believed in me did not guarantee success. It did something more important. It made perseverance sustainable. It prevented isolation from turning into despair. It reminded me that standing alone doesn't mean standing unsupported. And as the work compounded, as competence increased, and as stability slowly emerged, that early belief became part of the foundation. Not something I leaned on forever, but something that allowed me to build long enough to stand fully on my own. If you're walking this path right now, remember this. Confidence doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require approval, but it does benefit from trust. Choose wisely who has access to you during your most vulnerable phases. One person who believes in you, quietly, consistently, without conditions, can be enough to carry you through the hardest parts of becoming who you're meant to be. Chapter 7. Confidence comes from competence. At some point, confidence stops being something you try to feel and becomes something you quietly rely on. This shift doesn't happen because your fears disappear. It happens because your ability catches up to your responsibility. When that happens, confidence no longer needs encouragement. It has proof. For a long time, confidence feels emotional. It rises on good days and collapses on bad ones. It reacts to praise, criticism, and results. But emotional confidence is unstable. It depends on circumstances staying favorable, and circumstances never do. The kind of confidence that lasts is built differently. It's built through competence. Competence doesn't arrive suddenly. It accumulates through repetition, through mistakes corrected instead of ignored, through decisions made, reviewed, and refined, through learning that doesn't stop when things get hard. This is where the work begins to change character. Earlier, effort felt heavy. Every task required motivation. Every obstacle felt personal. But as skills sharpen and understanding deepens, effort becomes more efficient. You waste less energy. You see patterns sooner. You know where to focus and where to ignore noise. That clarity is not confidence by itself, but it creates it. I noticed this shift slowly. There was no moment where I felt ready, but decisions stopped feeling paralyzing. Problems that once felt overwhelming became manageable. I stopped reacting emotionally to setbacks because I had seen them before. I knew how to respond. Experience does that. When you've handled a situation once, fear loses some of its grip. When you've handled it 10 times, fear becomes information. When you've handled it enough, confidence becomes quiet certainty. This stage is where many people finally understand something important. Confidence is not self-belief without evidence. It's trust earned through competence. I didn't wake up one day suddenly believing in myself more. I woke up knowing that I could figure things out, that I could make a mistake and recover, that I could lead, adjust, and improve without panicking. That knowledge changes how you carry yourself. You speak more calmly. You listen more carefully. You don't rush to prove anything. You don't need to dominate conversations or defend your position aggressively. Confidence becomes less visible, but more persuasive. This is also where leadership begins to emerge naturally. When competence grows, others begin to feel it. Not because you announce it, but because your decisions make sense. Your actions are consistent. Your presence feels stable under pressure. People trust those who don't overreact. As the work compounded, the company began to stabilize. Processes improved, teams formed. Problems became more complex but also more solvable. Growth wasn't explosive, but it was real, sustainable, grounded. And with growth came responsibility. Leading others forces you to confront the limits of your competence honestly. You can no longer hide behind effort alone. You must think clearly, communicate effectively, decide with incomplete information, and take responsibility when things go wrong. This pressure refines confidence even further. You learn to separate emotion from judgment. You learn to act decisively without being reckless. You learn that confidence doesn't mean certainty. It means readiness to respond. Many people wait for confidence before they act, but competence is built by acting first, carefully, consistently, with feedback. That's the order most people get wrong. You don't become confident and then competent. You become competent and confidence follows. This stage also reshapes your relationship with fear. Fear doesn't disappear, but it no longer controls your behavior. It becomes a signal instead of a barrier. You feel it, assess it, and move forward anyway. That ability, to move with awareness instead of avoidance, is one of the clearest signs of real confidence. You also stop comparing yourself constantly, not because you think you're better than others, but because comparison becomes irrelevant. You're too focused on execution, on improving your system, on leading your responsibilities well. Confidence built on competence doesn't need to compete. It needs to perform. Another important shift happens here. You become patient with outcomes. When you know your process works, you don't panic when results fluctuate. You trust the system you've built. You refine it instead of abandoning it. That patience makes your confidence resilient. It doesn't spike or crash. It stabilizes. By this point, the journey no longer feels like survival. It feels like stewardship. You're no longer just trying to prove yourself. You're responsible for something larger than you. People depend on your clarity, your calm, your decisions. That responsibility further strengthens confidence. Because when others rely on you, you're forced to show up even on days you don't feel like it. And every time you do, competence deepens. Confidence solidifies. Looking back, the most important realization was this. Confidence didn't come from success alone. It came from capability developed under pressure, from skills sharpened through difficulty, from judgment refined through mistakes. This is why confidence built late in the journey is so different from confidence imagined early on. Early confidence is hopeful. Late confidence is grounded. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need reassurance. It doesn't need to be seen. It's present in how you move, decide, and respond. If you're still early in your path, this chapter should reassure you. You don't need to feel confident yet. You need to keep building competence, learning, practicing, improving, showing up even when it's uncomfortable. Confidence will arrive quietly when your ability can carry your responsibility. And when it does, it won't leave easily. Because it was earned. Chapter 8. When you realize you never needed their approval. There is a moment near the end of every long, difficult journey when you pause and look back. Not with pride, not with resentment, but with clarity. You don't feel the urge to prove anything anymore. You don't feel the need to explain your choices. You simply recognize how far you've come and how different you are from the person who started. This is the moment when you realize something quietly powerful. You never needed their approval to become who you are. For a long time, approval feels essential. It feels like oxygen. When people believe in you, progress feels lighter. When they don't, every step feels heavier. Early on, it's natural to want reassurance that you're on the right path, that your sacrifice makes sense, that you're not alone in your thinking. But approval has a hidden cost. It keeps your confidence conditional. It ties your sense of worth to opinions you can't control. And it delays the development of something far more important: self-trust. Looking back, I can see how much energy I once spent hoping others would understand. How often I imagined future conversations where I could finally say, "See, I was right." How many decisions were influenced, consciously or not, by the desire to be validated. That desire didn't disappear overnight. It faded gradually as something stronger replaced it. Ownership. Ownership of decisions, of outcomes, of mistakes, of growth. As the work matured and the company stabilized, the external noise softened. Not because people suddenly changed, but because I no longer needed their reactions to orient myself. Success didn't feel like revenge. It felt like responsibility. There's a major difference. When you're driven by the need for approval, success feels loud. When you're driven by alignment, success feels calm. By the time the company reached stability, supporting a growing team, carrying real responsibility, impacting real lives, I realized that the most important transformation had already happened long before the numbers reflected it. Confidence had stopped being reactive. It had become structural. I no longer asked, "What will they think?" I asked, "Is this the right decision?" That shift sounds simple, but it's profound. It means your internal compass is working. It means you're no longer outsourcing judgment. This stage also brings a kind of emotional neutrality that can be surprising. Praise doesn't inflate you. Criticism doesn't destabilize you. Both become information, not identity. That's when you know confidence has matured. Another realization becomes clear here. Many of the people who doubted you were never against you. They were simply afraid of what your path represented. And now that you're standing steadily, their fear loses relevance. Not because you've defeated it, but because you've outgrown it. You don't need to revisit old conversations. You don't need to correct old judgments. Time has already done the work. The approval you once wanted now feels unnecessary. What matters more is whether your life feels coherent, whether your work aligns with your values, whether you respect the person you've become through discipline, persistence, and honesty. That respect is worth more than applause. Standing here, it's clear that confidence didn't arrive as a reward. It was built through endurance, through choosing the harder path repeatedly, through staying when leaving would have been easier, through acting responsibly when no one was watching. And that kind of confidence doesn't ask to be seen. It shows itself in calm decision-making, in patience under pressure, in the ability to listen without defensiveness, in leadership that doesn't need to dominate. You also begin to understand that standing alone was never about isolation. It was about independence of mind, about learning to think clearly without needing consensus, about trusting yourself even when certainty was absent. Approval would have been comforting, but it would not have built this. The final lesson of this journey is simple, but not easy to accept. The people who doubted you did not slow you down. Your need for their approval did. And once that need dissolves, movement becomes natural. You stop hesitating, you stop second-guessing, you stop explaining, you move forward with clarity. This doesn't mean you become detached or arrogant. It means you become grounded. You can appreciate support without depending on it. You can accept criticism without absorbing it. You can succeed without performing success. Confidence at this stage feels almost boring, and that's a good thing. It means it's stable. If you're still early in this journey, this chapter is not meant to rush you. It's meant to reassure you. The approval you're seeking will never feel as good as the self-trust you're building. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the silence, the doubt, and the loneliness were not obstacles. They were training. You didn't become confident because others believed in you. You became confident because you learned to stand without belief, without applause, and without permission. And once you realize that, no opinion has the power to shake you again, because you already built what matters most. Stand alone. Stand strong. If you've stayed with this audiobook until now, it means something important. You recognize yourself in this journey. You may not share the same details, the same industry, or the same timeline, but you understand the feeling of walking forward without applause, of making decisions that others don't understand, of carrying doubt quietly while still doing the work. And that matters, because confidence is not built in moments of certainty. It's built in moments like these, when clarity exists, but reassurance does not. Throughout this journey, one truth should now be clear. Unshakable confidence is not something you discover inside yourself. It's something you construct through action, discipline, and honesty over time. It doesn't arrive suddenly. It doesn't announce itself. It forms slowly, through repeated choices, to stay aligned when it would be easier to retreat. You didn't need everyone to believe in you. You needed to believe in your ability to learn, to adapt, to endure. Standing alone was never the punishment. It was the training. Every phase you moved through served a purpose. Walking away from safety taught you responsibility. Failure taught you humility and resilience. Doubt from family forced you to find your own center. Distance from friends stripped away the need for approval. Silence gave you focus. Support from the right person gave you stability. Competence gave you certainty. And finally, clarity freed you from the weight of other people's opinions. None of that was wasted. If you're still early in this process, understand this. You are not behind. You are building something that doesn't rely on noise to exist. The quiet effort you're putting in now is shaping your future capacity. Even if no one sees it yet, it's working. If you're further along, take a moment to recognize how far you've come, not in outcomes alone, but in how you think, decide, and respond. That internal shift is the real achievement. Confidence at this stage doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to convince anyone. It shows itself in calm execution, in patience under pressure, in decisions made without panic. It shows itself in your ability to stay grounded when circumstances change, and perhaps most importantly, it shows itself in this realization. You don't need permission to live the life you're building. You don't need consensus. You don't need applause. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You need consistency. You need integrity. You need the discipline to keep showing up, especially when the excitement fades and the work becomes routine. That is where strength lives. From this point forward, let your confidence be quiet. Let your progress speak in time. Let your decisions be guided by clarity, not fear. You don't have to rush. You don't have to prove anything. You only have to stay honest with the path you've chosen. If doubt returns, and it will, remember this. Confidence is not the absence of doubt. It's the refusal to let doubt decide for you. You've already done the hardest part. You kept moving when standing alone felt heavy. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You learned instead of retreating. That means you're capable of far more than you once believed. So wherever you are right now, at the beginning, in the middle, or rebuilding again, stand there with calm, with patience, with self-respect. You don't need belief from the world. You've built something stronger. You've built belief in yourself.